Tonight, Kathleen Logan-Smith of the Missouri Coalition for the Environment, where he's talking on genetically modified foods and crops. Upcoming Green Speaker Series events. Forest Relief will give a presentation next month, and it'll be in the historic house, which is the same building, but it's a room over there. This space will be used by someone else. Trees are incredible. They hold soil, they hold water, they provide shade, they increase property values, they recycle carbon. It's amazing what trees do. At Missouri Forest Relief is in the business, well, they're a nonprofit, but they're in the business of planting trees. So I hope you'll come and join us in February. In April, I'm not quite sure when, we'll be showing, well, the plan is to show your environmental road trip. It's an eco-docu-comedy. It's a documentary. If you go to yurt.com, you'll see the trailer. It looks pretty good. So that will probably be in the auditorium at Maryville University. And then probably in May, here, Susan Benegas has started the Plantrition Project. The standard American diet takes a lot of energy, water, space to produce, and it really is unsustainable. I'm not real familiar with the Plantrition Project, but from what she's told me about it, it really sounds good. I think going to a more plant-based diet. And then Arbor Day, there are two events. The Green Team Commission is sponsoring electronics recycling or anything with a cord at the Municipal Center, and then from 1 to 3 in Longview Park, they'll be having software removal. I hope you join us for that. If you sign up for it, you'll get information.
Free trees too, right?
Pardon?
Are we giving out free native trees or
I don't know. Oh, at the Arbor Day event? I don't know much about it. This is new. Abigo is a way to store food. This is their sandwich wrap. You put your sandwich here, you fold it over. Oh no. Fold it, then you roll it down, and fold it over, and wrap it up. And this is, I think it's cotton, but it's made with beeswax, jojoba oil, and tree resin. It's compostable when you're done with it. It doesn't last forever, but it's all natural. It's a great product, and these are their business cards. You can smell the stuff, and you notice that it kind of sticks together when it's warm, and that helps you seal the food. So I'm going to pass this around, so everyone take a business card.
my business cards?
And there's the magazine and book exchange back on the table, and there are also free reusable grocery bags back on the table. So please help yourself to those. There are videos. We're taking a video right now, and these videos will be posted online on YouTube. And if you're not on my mailing list and would like to join, please let me know. Our speaker tonight is Kathleen Logan-Smith. She is with the Missouri Coalition for the Environment. She has served as their executive director. She is currently their director of environmental policy. If you listen to TWMU, you will hear her. That's 90.7 FM. You will hear her. I've heard her several times in the last few months. So she's been very active in the St. Louis area in environmental issues for a number of years now. So please welcome Kathleen Logan-Smith.
Hello, everyone. We're going to get the lecture get the radioactive waste out of the landfill on the Missouri River floodplain. That was the one that's next to the landfill that's on fire that you've heard so much about up by Bridgeton. And if you've driven at St. Charles Rock Road 270 over by the hospital there, you have smelled what's happening there. And so we've got a petition to the EPA, it's on stage, to get that cleaned up and get that radioactive waste removed, because now there's this landfill fire that's moving that way, and it makes it a little more urgent than it ever was before. We also have a petition to the Clean Water Commission because Missouri has exempted 80% of its waters from fishable, swimmable standards under the Clean Water Act, and that's technically illegal, and we have been pressing to get that fixed for the last 13 years, and the DNR keeps putting it off, and so we need a little extra push for the Clean Water Commission. So if you can sign that and help us get Missouri in the 21st century. Okay, so I think we're good here. Next. So the Missouri Coalition for the Environment was formed in 1969. We have been in the St. Louis region since then. I wasn't part of that original group of folks, but we work on environmental policy across the board. We were really local when we started back in '69. We worked by state in Illinois and St. Louis, and then it became apparent that working with 2 state legislatures and 2 EPA regions and all of that was just not very effective. So we focused and we pulled in. But we're the organization that helped save Forest Park from a lot of pavement. We helped save lots of parks from pavement. What's the one with the golf course that we fought down south? Queenie, yes, Queenie. We worked on Queenie Park. So we've done that. We work on national forest policy. We worked on upgrading Missouri water quality standards. That's a whole other presentation we should do for you one day. Most recently, we got the settlement with the Metropolitan Sewer District, the largest sewer district in Missouri, and forced them to stop dumping raw sewage into water. So that's the kind of work we do. We get engaged with the agencies at all different levels, and we're working right now with the Superfund side at Westlake Landfill. We've got a gentleman, Brad Walker, who works on the big river issues, the Missouri River and the Mississippi. We are lucky as Missourians to have 500 miles of the Missouri River in our state. We have 400 miles of the Mississippi. And there's a lot of river policy decisions that are made at the regional and federal level. And so being represented in those decisions is really important. I work on food and farm policy in Missouri. One of because we work on water, you can't work on water quality without working on farming, because so much of our water is impacted by what goes on the land. And so you have to work on food and farming, you have to work on floodplain development, you have to work on these issues. So you'll see us in the news. You know, we were in the news we testified at the hearing on the Walmart in Ellisville. You know, those kinds of issues, you'll see us there. We also have done all the work that's done in Dover and Herculaneum, where the nation's largest lead smelter affects that community, and we worked for over a decade on that facility. And we got the air quality standards at the national level upgraded, so it was a major victory. And we also worked to preserve open space. But tonight we're going to talk about food. So the first thing I want to do is find out how many people here grow food. How many people here grow anything? All right. Okay, how many people grow food that they actually eat? Okay. And then I wanted to find out, I wanted to ask you, if I said that we're going to create a genetically modified organism that we're going to use to make insulin to treat diabetics, so we can have a more affordable source of insulin for diabetics, how many people would be okay with that? So what if I said we're going to create genetically modified organisms that are going to cause reproductive harm? How many people are okay with that? Okay. So we have a reasonable group of folks here. Because one of the things that's so disturbing about this conversation is that it is very polarized, right? I mean, people are either, you know, if you say maybe genetic organisms need more safety investigation, all of a sudden you're labeled as anti-scientific and anti-GMO, and biotech is our economic future, and what are you trying to send us back to the world of the Luddites? Or, you know, you get, it's very polarized, and the conversation is very polarizing, and it really doesn't help us make decisions as citizens in this community. So I'll tell you why I care about food, mostly because of that, but because I really started paying attention when I became a mom, right, about what my kid eats. And my kid has never had milk with bovine growth hormone in it in her life. Now, she's the shortest kid in her class, okay? She has the genes to go with it. But it's just the kind of thing that when you become a parent, you start paying attention to everything that goes in your kid. And then you notice that when your kid eats certain things, they go crazy, right? You know, my daughter cannot have chocolate after 7 p.m. It makes her crazy because she's so sensitive to caffeine, right? So, and certain kids are very sensitive to sugar. And there's some kids that are sensitive to red food coloring. Who knew that? But I've had parents tell me that if their kid eats red food coloring, they'll throw those mad, insane fits that you see, you know, on the nanny movies. I started paying attention. The other thing is I have friends with a lot of dietary challenges. I have a friend who cannot eat gluten or anything related to gluten. She cannot eat flax. She cannot eat tarragon. She cannot eat chocolate, and I think there's one more thing. And so cooking for her has been a major challenge. Anybody here have folks with dietary allergies that you have to work? And that is challenging as a cook, as a parent, as a friend, you know, and what do you take to the potluck, right? To make sure that you don't set off somebody's allergies. And all the parents know if you're getting stuff for your kid's school, you can't pack peanuts half the time, you know. So food is a concern. And there are communities across Missouri talking about food. And that's why we want to talk about GMOs, because GMOs are in our food. So what is a GMO? I pulled all this research for you so you don't have to. Basically, a genetically modified organism is an organism that's been genetically engineered, and genetic engineering is inserting a foreign gene into an organism for some desirable effect, okay? And, you know, the ideas are creative, and sometimes they're things that you would think of if you're just sitting around thinking, how can we make tomatoes survive the frost, or, you know, different things like that. But all these terms are pretty interchangeable, but they're not the same as selective breeding, which is the way we engineered plants for eons, right? We take the stronger plant and we keep those seeds and, you know, breed it for desirable traits over time. That is not the same thing. Somebody said they saw an article that was trying to equate selective breeding with genetic engineering. Not the same thing at all. Genetic engineering happens in a laboratory. Genes are inserted, foreign genes from, you know, species that would not be mixed are mixed in a laboratory. And I'll give you some examples of that in a minute because some of them are just whacked. And this cisgenesis at the bottom is kind of a hybrid. It's if you want to take the desirable traits from this apple tree and from this apple tree and make a new apple tree, doing that in the laboratory instead of doing it through breeding. And they're looking for, the article I was reading was, they're looking for a little more generosity in terms of public policy for that kind of genetic engineering. So why do we make GMOs? The same reason we do everything, right? To make money. That's one of the big things here. The new thing that's on the market that's up for consideration now is GE salmon. It's seeking approval for commercialization. And I'm going to give you some information about how to get your comments in on that procedure soon. But it's a salmon that's engineered with an eel to grow fast, really, really fast. And so basically it was engineered with a hormone, okay? So the thing that's interesting to note and that we should probably think about in the back of our heads is that a lot of these genes come from bacteria, they come from viruses, they come from are their hormones, right? They're things that are pretty strong in terms of a biological impact. And so we need to keep that in the back of our head. And then we made our Roundup tolerant, Roundup ready soybeans, right? Roundup ready corn. We made these herbicide resistant plants so that we could, instead of having to spray the weeds and try to keep it off the crop, we could just spray everything, right? Just blanket it with herbicides and it won't kill the GMO crops, it'll kill everything else, and we'll move on and we can keep on farming.
Those crops that they put the Roundup on, they're not genetically modified, are they?
They're Roundup ready or GMO crops. They're
They
GMO
are
crops.
GMO crops.
They had to engineer them to withstand the herbicide.
Okay.
Right? Okay, so here's the thing about glyphosate, and we're going to talk about glyphosate a little bit because it is the biggest reason we have GMO seeds, right? Because we're selling seeds to sell Roundup. That's what we're doing. So we're selling seeds, we're selling Roundup. And so you can't really talk about genetically modified anything without talking about Roundup, because the biggest part of the market, the billions of dollars, the lobbyists, the scientists, the advocates, the PR, everything is wrapped up with Roundup. And so Roundup is, and we'll talk about this a little later, but it's a chelating agent. Does anybody here know what a chelating agent is? Well, my first experience with the term chelation had to do with lead-poisoned children. When you have children whose blood level gets over about 30 and up into the 60s, they're in danger of going into a coma, and you have to get the lead out of their body ASAP. And so they will put chelating agents into their bodies to pull the lead out of the blood. And what it does is it bonds with positively charged ions. And in a plant, it bonds with positively charged ions that are some of the critical minerals. So it interferes with the biology of how the cells are supposed to function, and then the plants will die. But we'll go into more about that later. And then we also engineered Bt corn and Bt cotton. So do you guys know what Bt is? It's this bacteria that it's a soil bacteria, but it kills bugs. It kills bugs. And so they thought, well, we'll just put this bug-killing bacteria in the plant, and then when they eat the corn, kill the bugs. Problem solved. So that's what they did. And so now we have plants that produce the Bt toxin. So we have cotton that produces the toxin in its cells. We have corn that produces a toxin in its cells, and it kills bugs. And it kills bugs by destroying their digestive tract. So keep that in the back of your mouth. And they also engineered, we have disease-resistant papaya that were engineered in Hawaii. Those are on the market. We have zucchini, crookneck squash, sugar beets. We'll go through the list in a minute. But there are a number of things that have been genetically modified. And then we also did genetic engineering for the medicine. We actually did take the bacteria that makes insulin, and we make cheaper insulin using this technology. So this technology has a place in the lab, and the question for us is, does it have a place on the farm? Okay, so here's the funny one, right? Somebody genetically engineered glow-in-the-dark fish. And now you can buy your very own genetically modified glow-in-the-dark fish. And they use a lot of this stuff for science. They engineer things so that certain cells will glow, and they're looking at how they're coming, how certain treatments are affecting them. And so it's a handy thing. The fish is it's just an American thing. What can I say? It's the way we do business in America. This slide is just up here to show you how many billions of dollars our chemical companies make from GMO seeds, and from Roundup. And so the two biggest are DuPont and Monsanto. Monsanto is by far the largest, most lucrative. So they are. This is just from this year. So from last quarter, 2012, $1.18 billion for Roundup, and they're doing pretty good there.
Isn't that about a 30% decrease from 2010?
Increase, according to the Wall Street.
Oh, increase, because
China makes about 800,000 whatever tons or pounds of Roundup, yeah, because it's now generic. So everybody's making glyphosate now, yeah. But it's still, yeah, still number one. And the article I was reading, they were talking about marketing position. They're still going to be slightly higher, more expensive than the generic, but they still sell it. So can't argue with that. They also dominate the seed business. Now, I don't know if you pay attention to seed companies, but a lot of our historic seed companies around the country have been bought up by Monsanto and some of these other outfits, Syngenta, DuPont, Bayer's a big one in Germany especially. So there's a lot of concentration in the market. And that makes a lot of farmers nervous because traditionally farmers would keep their seed and then replant it or barter with their neighbors. And now they have to buy seed every year. So they're always in a debt situation. And then Monsanto is very aggressive about defending its patents, as you probably know. And they make a pretty good set of money on that. But it probably doesn't, I don't know if it makes up for what they pay in lawyers or not, but they're very aggressive about defending their patents. And here's where all the corn is, where the GM is in our country. Corn. And that's, a lot of that corn goes straight to livestock. A lot of that corn goes straight to ethanol plants. A lot of the corn that grows on the land in this country doesn't ever cross your plate. Certainly not in the form of corn. If it does cross your plate, it's in your soda or your Twinkies if you eat them, that kind of thing. So alfalfa is new, so we don't have numbers on GM alfalfa that is out there. The concern about alfalfa is that it goes directly to livestock, right? And then there's everything else. So there's the crops themselves, and then there's everything that comes from the crops. Now, soy is a big input. If you look at what soy goes into paints, okay? Soy goes into everything. It goes into cosmetics. It goes into, so a lot of these food additives are soy related, and a lot of the soy is GM. And then there's this extra long list that you can't even read, but there. If you look at the back of like the cheapest, salad dressing at the grocery store, you'll see half of this stuff, right? It's things you can't pronounce and stuff your grandmother would not recognize as food. Then we had the big fight last November in California. They were trying to get GM foods labeled, right? And the food industry spent $46 million to defeat that effort. And the reason the Naked Juice picture is up here is because I'm personally boycotting Naked Juice, which is one of my favorite products on planet Earth, but they gave money to defeat GM labeling, so I don't give them my money. That's how that goes. It's a sacrifice. And my daughter says, "Are we going to buy some Naked Juice?" I'm like, "No, sorry, we're out of it." And that's not to say that it's doing anything to that company, but it's just my personal statement about what I do with my money. So the interesting thing is this research that I pulled for you guys, because this topic is new to me. I'm not an expert by any means, and so I apologize if you expect me to be. I am learning with you on this stuff, and I have a ways to go. One thing I'm interested in is promoting some reasonable dialogue, because the colorization of this issue is insane, and it's really hurting any kind of productive conversations, because there are some good things about genetic engineering that can help save lives. Let's talk about those, but let's not ignore the stuff that might not be that good. So this is an interesting little tidbit about how GM developed when they're trying to get approval for the flavor safe tomato. One of the things they have to do, they're required to do, is put a marker gene in there that says, hey, hey, I'm a GMO. And so they wanted to use this antibiotic as a marker gene, and they did. But this note here was a concern from the FDA scientists that said, unleashing this much antibiotic into the population is not a good idea, right? Because we hear about all this antibiotic resistance, and we think about hospitals, and we think about, antibiotics used in livestock, but none of us are thinking about antibiotics that are in GM, right? That's not on the table. Now, the flavor saver tomato didn't go anywhere because it didn't taste good. So, there you have it, so they pulled it from the market. But here's some other weird things I just pulled just for the fun of it. This is, ideas that people had, right? Spider genes inserted in the DNA to see if goat milk can produce spider web proteins. Now that's a kind of creative idea, though. You can see how that might be nifty, right? Spider web's the strongest, lightest thing you could ever deal with. So it would be a great thing. And then, of course, their thought was for bulletproof vests. I'm thinking playground equipment or something, but we have different brains. Anyway, so here's some of the ideas that get thrown around in laboratories. And this is what gets biotech people excited, right? These kinds of ideas get them excited. And some of the rest of us too, if we were honest. And really, it's interesting to think about possibilities. My daughters always say, what if I had superpowers, Mom? What if, maybe you could clean your room. Anyway, so there's a lot of promises with GM. I mean, there's a couple things that you always hear. We do GM so we can get better yields. Or so we can sell more herbicides. I mean, it's how much of which is true. The truth is, we're not getting better yields with GM. We get good yields, we get fair yields. In a drought, we get worse yields, but in general, there's nothing stunning about GM crops, except that they're a lot easier to deal with weed-wise, right? And you can apply those herbicides. Fewer chemicals? No, we're not using fewer chemicals because of them. And now we have this other problem, which is really frustrating. We have this this herbicide resistance happening. So now we're applying the herbicides like a blanket, and it's killing the weeds, except that it's not now because the weeds are adapting, and now they're applying other herbicides. So now they're using Roundup plus 2 or 3 other kinds of herbicides, and now we have weeds in Illinois that are resistant to all 3 herbicides. And so you end up, if you're getting an arms race with nature, which is what happens here, this is an arms race with nature, it's just going to keep escalating. And I don't know, at some point we have to go back to working with nature as a partner instead of trying to, kill the weeds. We're supposed to solve our pest problems, but now we have pests that are getting resistant to the BT corn and the BT cotton. So these plants that are producing these pesticides that eat the guts of the bugs are no longer eating the guts of the bugs because the bugs have evolved to handle it. So that's another problem. And so then we put more pesticides on, more herbicides, more pesticides. So here's the weed where we can find our resistant weeds. And of course, Missouri is right in the middle of that, and Arkansas. And the other thing they've discovered is that the allergens from some of the GM activities can transfer. So these genes can move. So what we've discovered, the bottom line is you can get the genes, the foreign genes, into the GMO. But you can't get them out. So we know how to, it's a one-way street. We know how to do it. We don't know how to undo it. And that's one of the challenges to our scientists. And are they safe? The FDA says they're safe. Or generally recognized as safe. But we haven't really tested and we're not going to require it. But just us, it's okay. It's safe. It's okay. We don't have a lot of data to prove that they're safe. And that's a frustrating thing too when you're looking for data on genetically modified organisms. It's not there. And that's been really challenging. The scientists at the FDA, their opinions weren't fully expressed in the rulemaking. And so the rulemaking became, it's generally recognized as safe. We're going to pretend it's just like any other food. Even though most tomatoes don't have fish genes, we're going to assume they're the same thing. And But the FDA said we're not going to do it. So, are they tested? Well, you can't test GM anything without getting the crops and the products from the producers. So if Monsanto won't give you the seeds, you can't test them. And Monsanto only gives the seeds to people they want them to have. So, and there was a literature review that was done, and that's what the second paragraph is here, that interestingly, the researchers that were working with the producers never found any problems with genetically modified organisms. However, the researchers, the few researchers that were independent, found some problems. The other thing that's weird about this, about genetically modified organisms, is that they're not necessarily stable because nature's evolving all the time. I mean, if you give a plant a fish gene, who knows what nature's going to do with that, right? I mean, that's, and we don't know. We don't know if you put a virus in a plant or an animal that's not usually there, we don't know what that's going to do. And nature, viruses are always evolving, you know, bacteria are always evolving, and biology is always evolving. So it's one of the issues that sort of evolved is that the GM, the genetically modified organisms that they may test here, after a couple of generations may not be the same. So testing them once might not really tell you what it needs to tell you because they're not stable over generations. Just like our gene pool is not stable over generations either. So you can't, having a blanket safety recommendation is kind of dicey. So there's been a couple of studies done, the one that's most recent, and very few on humans. But in Canada, where they've been growing GM crops for the longest amount of time, they've been growing canola up there for a long time, longer than anywhere. They're the first place to plant GM crops. They tested the blood from pregnant women and non-pregnant women, and they test the fetal blood, okay? And they found the breakdown products. Now, one of the things is they say that, you know, they found the breakdown products of Roundup, and they found the breakdown products of the Bt toxin, okay? And from people who were not farm kids, they're not exposed to Roundup otherwise. This was a food exposure. And so now we know, so the stuff does get in our bodies, right? From the food. And they know that now. There's been a few studies that actually demonstrate that now. So when you eat GM crops, you are eating herbicides, you are eating the Bt toxin, you are eating that stuff and taking it into your body, and the genetic material is talking to each other, okay? And how many people here understand that you are an ecosystem? You have a million kinds of organisms living in you that do things for your body, and they have a lifespan and they need certain things. So anyway, so this study suggested, their conclusion was that we need more study on what the impacts are on pregnant women, right? That's, and these exposures here. Not to say that there was any noticeable effect, but just to say they found it there, okay? And so that's one of the issues here is, you know, we need to know what we know and know what we don't know about these materials. It's interesting too, though, but they did a short-term pig study, and they didn't find any of these toxins in the piglets, but they did find them in people who'd been eating them and living in the world for 15 years. So it may be an issue, right? This is just for fun. But it may be an issue where chronic exposures have a different impact. The other long-term study that I found, and there weren't many, there just aren't that many studies. And I keep looking, I am addicted to Google Scholar. If you haven't found Google Scholar, you need to do that because that's where all the scientific research lives. But anyway, the long-term rodent study found problems in the subsequent generations. So, you know, mama rat was fed GMOs and had a litter, and they had a litter, and had a litter, and they didn't. And that's a problem. And somebody with a biology background is going to make a whole lot more sense of it than me. I love biology, but I did not major in it because I did not want to dissect a cat. I kid you not, guys, I kid you not. But if you look at what happened there and the implications of what happened there, because GM crops are often used for feeding livestock, and in this group, the number of pups weaned, the average litter size and weight at weaning were lower in the GM groups, and the pup losses were higher in the GM groups. So the offspring were not as strong. And then this was sort of gratifying down here. The food that was non-GMO was fine. They were healthy rats all the way through. The FDA staff wanted more tests about the effects on livestock, because you guys know if you have a cat or a mouse or any kind of pet, the levels of exposures that they can tolerate are not the same as what a human person can tolerate. And my cat weighs 3 pounds, so she's getting a different level of exposure if she's eating GM food than I am. And so some of the scientists wanted to see more work done there with livestock, especially in terms of reproductive effects. There's a couple of different issues here, and this is why it's very, very complicated, and this is why it would have been nice to do the science before we unleashed it on the world, but instead, we're having to try to do the science after it's out there, and the challenge is that it's hard to tease out what's from the gene, what's from the food itself, what's from the herbicide that's in the food, and it's almost impossible to design a study that gets the job done now, because they can find effects, but they can't say that those effects are from the GM. They could say maybe they're from the herbicides that were used on the GM, or maybe something we don't even know about, right? So the research is just missing, and that's one of the challenges. The Flavor Saver story, they wanted more tests because some of the companies' submissions showed stomach lesions when these tomatoes were tested on rodents, and they never got their tests. But there was a memo written, and this quote's from the memo, about the body count. And that's a lot of times, sadly, in this country, how we deal with unknown substances. I mean, we release a lot of chemicals on the market, and chemicals are innocent until proven guilty. And we pretty much wait for a body count, and then we start pulling back on whatever toxic we decided to release. Do you guys know what this epigenetics is? This is exciting new research. A lot of the nutritionists are into epigenetics now and understanding that. So epigenetics is the sort of combination of the environment and genetics, but it's also how you pass the impacts of that environment onto your offspring. And so they've discovered, for example, in this research, things like, people who grew up during the Irish potato famine, their offspring had certain characteristics because of that period of hardship and starvation that they would have not otherwise developed. So it's the environment meets genetics meets your history and your family history. It's a very exciting field. But what it says to the rest of us is everything is much more interconnected and much more complicated than we thought, right? So we knew that. Oh wait, I can't skip that slide because this is the one where this is the one where I wanted to stress how aggressive and how polarized these conversations can be. Now, I often come across as excitable and aggressive, but I try not to be obnoxious, and I try not to be rude, and I'm not calling Monsanto names, right? And so and it would be nice if that was happening everywhere. But it turns out there's a big PR push against people who speak out questioning GMOs. And what happens, it's a lot like what happened with tobacco. Do you guys remember what happened with tobacco? For 50 years, it was first we got to, deny that there's a problem, and then we've got to embarrass people and, slam their credentials or whatever. So I'm going to tell you right now, I don't have any credentials to slam. So don't even try that, because I'm just a mom, right? That's my credential, and I am a consumer, and that's all I am. I don't claim to be a biologist. What I do claim is to have some sense of observation, and I noticed that a couple of things are wrong. Our food system isn't working. It's not providing nutrition to the people who eat it. And we have diabetes and obesity and a whole bunch of other things that are just not right. Now, can we blame that on any one thing? Absolutely not. We can't, because that would not be right. I know enough about what's going on in the world and how crops are produced to know that it's not one thing. It's a lot of things, but the solution is going to be up to all of us. This was a little post that was out there about how scientists have been attacked. And if you read the GM literature, it's interesting because almost every piece of writing on this, they almost sort of want to come out and sound like cheerleaders for genetic engineering before they even get to the conclusions of their paper. But it's almost like they have to prove that they're objective by being overly enthusiastic at the beginning. And it's, I don't know, it's frustrating. But here's part of the reason. Our friend Michael Taylor, who does this rotating situation with government, Monsanto, government, Monsanto, government, Monsanto, and now he's our food safety guy.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because he has a lot of power where he is now, but he's had a lot of power all the way up during his career, and he's used it. And I don't think without the efforts put into the regulatory side of it, any of this stuff would have gotten by without more scrutiny, frankly. But so that's what glyphosate looks like. In case you are in chemistry, anything? Young folks still there? So we're going to talk a little bit about glyphosate because it's useful to know. It interferes with plant metabolism. It interferes with protein synthesis, and it goes to the whole plant. So it's in the whole plant. It's in the stems, it's in the stalks, it's in the leaves. And if you're more interested, it has the names of the exact proteins and exact enzymes that are disrupted. But it's a chelating agent is what it is fundamentally. And chelating agents interfere with micronutrients. And so that's another thing we're going to talk about in a minute when we talk about how healthy food and soil needs to be. It does persist in soil and water. It's not like PCBs or anything, but it doesn't go away quickly. I guess it depends on how you define quickly. But it does last, and it can contaminate water. They've proven that now. They found it in human urine. They know it crosses the placental barrier, and they know it kills human cells. So, and that spray does not refer to humans. This is a term that farmers use right before they harvest a crop, and this was a study and conversation in Germany. But right before they harvest a crop, they'll spray it all with Roundup, so the plants will start to die, and it'll be easier to harvest the potatoes. And that's where the potatoes and a bunch of other crops, and so then you get this. Instead of having a waiting period, or instead of having herbicides applied at the beginning of the season, you end up having herbicides applied right before harvest. And they're concerned about beer. Did you see this part? This was interesting to me. You can't use it on malting barley, and you can't do this dying off thing with barley in Europe because it messes with the beer. Don't mess with the beer. So, just for your brewer friends, just tell them, don't try this at home. And then there was another paragraph that sort of stood out. It said everything there is to say about Roundup. It's hard to get the laboratories equipment to test for it anyway, and so it has a number of effects. But we all love it, don't we? I mean, Americans love this stuff. We love this stuff. We use it everywhere. People are out there with their Roundup. Oh, I mean, they're sidewalk and everything. You want something dead, you use your Roundup. And a lot of conservationists use it. A lot of the Missouri Department of Conservation uses it. A lot of restoration ecologists use it. You know, kill that evil honeysuckle, right? But we were all told it was safe, too, right? Okay, so here's the exciting thing, and I won't talk too long on this, but I could go for a day, I promise. Because the soil life is one of the most interesting and fascinating fields of biology. It is something we all should know. But the bottom line is that if your soil is healthy, your plant will be healthy. And if your plant is healthy, it will have nutrition in it. And if it's healthy, people who eat it will be healthy. And that's really how it works. The system is pretty straight up. And I wanted to talk a little bit about micronutrients because one of the things that some herbicides can do is disrupt the life in the soil. There are millions of organisms living in the soil, all doing a job, okay? There's mycorrhizal fungi, and there's bacteria, and there's even viruses. There's a virus that helps plants survive drought. It's the most exciting little thing I've ever heard. But the plants who have the virus live through this hot drought, and the plants who didn't. And they don't know why. And isn't that great that we don't know why? I mean, I think it's great that there's so much still to learn of all these organisms that live in our soil. And but part of what they do is they go out and scavenge for nutrients, and especially the mycorrhizal fungi. They go out and they'll bring in water if the plant needs water. They'll bring in nitrogen if the plant needs nitrogen. And in order to take care of your mycorrhizal fungi, you have to leave it alone. You can't rip it up with a till every 6 months or so and you have to feed it, and you have to give it space and leave it, stay out of its way. But here's some of the things micronutrients do. Boron will help with cell strength and cell division, and sulfur helps with protein synthesis, and calcium carries all your other micronutrients, and all these things can be made available to plants if there's life in the soil. And yet, if you have chemicals that are killing the life in the soil, you're going to have less of all of those things. And so you can have, on an acre of healthy soil, there can be 2,400 pounds of life if you weigh it. I don't know who the grad student was that came up with that number, but if you scoop it out and weigh those organisms over a ton per acre. And so what happens if you have, how many people here have pets? So if you don't feed your pets for 6 months, what happens? Right? I mean, if you don't feed the life in your soil for 6 months, it's not going to do well, which is why I'm a real big fan of cover crops these days, because you have to, bare soil is a no-no. And I'm guilty right now because my flower beds, I didn't plant a cover crop, and I was thinking I should have put rye in, and I didn't, and my microorganisms are not going to be happy with me, and I'm going to have to deal with that. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that this is all very complex, and it's very interrelated, and you cannot. It's like having a room full of a domino game. If you move one, it's going to move everything, and it'll change it all. And so what we've done with herbicides, and what we do with tilling, and what we do with some of the other ways we farm, is we upset the system. And we're going to, if we're going to starve the good microorganisms and feed the bad ones, bad things are going to happen, and we're going to end up with food with less nutrition in it, and we're going to end up with people with less nutrition in them. And if you look at America, we eat all the time, and we're not getting nutrition out of it. I mean, we're eating all the time. And you can walk into any Walmart and identify a situation that Americans are eating plenty of calories, but we're not getting nutrition. So there's something wrong with the food system. Here's another example of what can happen when you screw up the soil balance of the organisms in your soil. Sudden death syndrome, isn't that lovely? It's a lovely name. It happens in soy plants. It doesn't happen in people. So it's a soy thing, but it's a fungi infection. But what happens with herbicides is that they find that they boost the fungi, the bad fungi, and they kill the good guys, and then you end up with something completely out of balance and dead soybeans. right here at the Mississippi River, and then where everything comes together. And our basin has some of the most highest levels of this everywhere. So it'd be interesting to see what that looks like in terms of public health. So if you don't want to eat GMOs, you have to buy organic, and it'll cost you more. And it's probably cheaper than medical bills, so you kind of have to pay that. Look for non-GMO project seals too. That's, you know, the things that say this milk doesn't have bovine growth hormone, for example.
Does it have to say it's non-GMO if it says organic?
Not right now.
Not right now.
No, there's a little bit of discussion about the livestock side of that, but
But if it is organic, then you can be pretty sure.
If it says it's organic, if it's certified organic, it's you're safe. And it's interesting because I was at the Missouri Organic Association conference last year when it was in St. Louis, and there were people trying to raise organic chickens, and they couldn't find organic grain growers, right, to buy the organic grain to feed the organic chickens. But this year at the Missouri Organic Association conference, there were lots of organic grain growers growing wheat and corn and rye and oats and all that stuff organically in our state. So, and then right across the river in Illinois. So, and some of the stories in terms of how things fared in the drought are pretty telling. The numbers that were coming in, it was like, you know, some of the crops were the GM crops in the drought last year were really badly performing, but some of the standard crops were performing. Nothing like a good year, but about a factor of what, 4 or 5 times better than the GM crops. So it was interesting. The other thing, this is the hardest part if you're going to avoid GM, sugar. Because if it says sugar, it doesn't say cane sugar, it's going to be beet sugar, or at least some beet sugar, and it's probably GM beet sugar. So that's going to be the hardest, you know, if you're going to become a label reader, that's going to be the hard one right there. And then a lot of times cheese is that way too. If, you know, dairy products aren't labeled organic, it's tricky. It's easier with, you know, vegetables and things, but processed foods are almost always going to have GM in them. And that's one of the reasons why the food industry, PepsiCo, all those people spent billions, millions of dollars, 46 million to defeat the labeling law. And there is a labeling law proposed in Missouri in the General Assembly right now. And I didn't look up the bill number for you, but you go to the Missouri General Assembly website, you can look that up. The other thing you can get is a downloadable shopping guide. The Institute for Responsible Technology puts out a shopping guide on how to buy GMO-free stuff. There's a lot of dietitians who are paying attention to the GM issue. And maybe it's not GM at all. Maybe the problem is processed foods, right? I mean, we don't know what's making people sick, but the GM is in the processed foods, and a lot of people who stop eating them get better. And so they get better because they have, you know, fewer chemicals in their world entirely, or fewer genetically modified organisms. We don't know, but they do get better. So, you know, there's something right there. We can't blame everything on one thing, because nothing's that simple. It's not that all genetically modified things are bad, and it's not that it's just that we don't know where they are, and we don't know what they're doing to our bodies, we don't know what they're doing to our ecosystems, and we don't know how they might change, and that's an issue. So comments are due on April 26th on GE salmon. You can go to regulations.gov and just type in genetically engineered salmon, and it'll come up, and they'll have a button there for submitting your comments. And you can read the comments that have been submitted already. You can read the data that's been supplied on the salmon, and then you'll know that you got your 2 cents in. So far, all the genetically modified crops, I think, have been approved. I don't think anybody's ever been told, no, you can't go to market. It'll be a challenge to shop without labels. You won't know about the salmon because there's no GE labeling anywhere. So we do label wild-caught salmon and we label farm salmon, but we don't label GE salmon. So if they do approve it, it'll be out there in the salad bar near you. So the thing that's really clear when you look at the information that's available is that we need more research on the health impacts of genetically modified organisms to the extent that we can test them on, and what they do to mammals and people and amphibians and ecosystems and plants and soil life. I mean, there's a long list of things that could use research here. The producers need to start forking over the product so it can be tested. Because if you're going to stand behind a product and say it's safe, then stand behind it. Period. And let's prove it. Because this is the show me state, after all. A moratorium on new product approvals is something to think about. Because why, we haven't tested the ones that are out there. And we are an experiment at this point. I mean, we are a lab rat. So, yeah. You are a lab rat as it is right now, and you are eating organisms that your body didn't evolve to eat. So, how's it working for you? That's the question. The government is not doing a great job of putting public health first, from my point of view. And I think we need labels at the very least. It would help people shop, because if you're like me, and not everybody's like me, of course, but I have a kid, and going to the grocery store with a kid is a challenge, and I don't have time to read every label. And sometimes I get home with whole tomatoes, and I want to chop tomatoes, and because I just had time to see the can with the word tomato on it, and that's as far as I got. And I don't know how many of you have shop and read every label carefully, but that takes hours, and I don't have that kind of time. So, and sometimes they change the packages so it looks just like the thing you used to get, right? So labels would be nice that say, hey, this has got genetically modified stuff in it. And in Europe and China requires labels. Hello. It's not too much to ask. I think that if you're not going to do the testing, at least label it so that, if we want to be a lab rat, we can. And if we choose not to, we don't have to be. Because I think that's worth doing. And I would suggest people table their Roundup. There are times when I've thought about, Roundup on honeysuckle because it's so evil, but I personally don't own any. However, if you stop buying it, there'll be 12 more ounces that won't be in the environment. So it's something. And if you can get your Parks Department to stop using it too, because it is creating resistant weeds and stuff, and that's not doing us any favors. And then also get educated. This is an education for me, this project here, and I am still learning, and there's still more to learn, and I'm sure you have questions and things you want to know about. So let's talk about those.
Oh, Dirk has to say his final.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
It's 8 o'clock.
It's 8 o'clock.
If you need to go, we understand. But Kathleen will be happy to take your questions now.
Sure.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. A friend of mine some time ago gave me a couple of Roma tomatoes, and I don't eat that much salad during the winter, so they were in my refrigerator for over a month, and they were still beautifully intact, and it made me wonder what was in them that kept them so.
A lot of our vegetables are irradiated now. Let me tell you the grape story, okay? I bought a bunch of grapes for my Girl Scout troop, right, in October. And we didn't eat them all, and they sat in the fridge. And like in New Year's, they were still in the fridge. And I remember when grapes left in the fridge would turn into raisins, or they would turn into furry green things. They wouldn't look the same like they did in October. And then I handled them like hazardous waste. So I was like, I am not going to eat these things. Clearly, if it doesn't behave like food, I'm very suspicious of it, right? That's how I got my daughter not to eat Twinkies. She ate half a Twinkie one time, and then she didn't want to eat the rest. And I said, well, let's just sit it out on the counter and see what happens to it. So we watched this Twinkie sort of shrink and swell, like with the humidity, but it was so unlike food. We were both like, stay away. If it doesn't act like food, it isn't food. Really. And there's some interesting videos. You can see a video on the internet of somebody eating ramen noodles and blue Gatorade. Has anybody seen that video? it'll gross you out because they swallowed a miniature camera and it goes through their digestive system.
Oh.
But it's not food. It doesn't act like food. So why would you want to eat it? So yeah, how many people have had that experience with food that lasted way too long, right? Yeah, it does. And I think it's irradiated though. I think that's why. Some of it, I think it's
What is
irradiated.
irradiating?
Kills bacteria.
Kills bacteria, yeah.
But there's good radiation.
Yeah, they,
They gave it radiation.
Yeah, they-
Bacteria.
yep.
So the fruit of genetically modified fruit, will seeds of that fruit produce?
Genetically modified plants, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Will produce fruit. So one of the ways Monsanto is controlling seed is by not allowing the seed of the fruit to produce the same product.
right, but all of these
Is that
GM
across the
crops
board?
will produce GM crops, as far as we know.
Well, haven't they genetically modified it to not produce seed?
The
I mean, that's
terminator
what,
gene.
They wanted to put the Terminator gene in, but I don't think they got that approval because it freaked everybody out that it would like mix with other plants and that would really cause.
Monsanto's wanting to control seed.
Right.
And so if a GM wheat seed and it grows and you take the wheat seed of that plant, my question, across the board, will that produce, that seed then produce wheat?
Well, the wheat and corn will, and that's what Monsanto's are, they're suing the farmer in Indiana.
Isn't there a court case?
He produced it himself.
Well, he saved the seed.
Right.
And so
okay.
that,
You replanted them, yeah.
but I don't know that, like fruit, the fruit may be sterile.
Yeah, I was thinking that it was, but I don't know.
I don't know much about the papayas and the green peppers and all that. There's not a lot of research. There's not a lot of research out there. And I actually think we should probably just start a study group that just keeps following the research and reviews it periodically because it's still out there, it's still coming, And maybe we could foster some dialogue about it, about places where we're concerned. I mean, my concerns are about soil health, right? And the organisms in the soil, and then the organisms in us that might be affected. And I want to know how that interaction is happening and if there's an impact from either herbicides or GMOs. And I would like to know that. And if there's something we can do to mitigate that. One of the things they found with certain plants is that because it's a chelating agent, plants can be starved for sulfur or manganese or any of the number of micronutrients. So what they did was they treated some of these crops with manganese so that they could make up for that deficiency being caused by the herbicide. So that's, ways to mitigate it on the farm. And so I don't know if that applies to people, but it would be nice to know and have some more information. So, because we need the same minerals. We have proteins that are synthesized with the help of sulfur and calcium and other things. So, why would we want to disrupt that system? How can we make sure that we don't?
You may have addressed this earlier, but is there something we can do to address the labeling issue and fight that?
Well, there's a bill in the Missouri
Oh, you-
legislature. Yeah, I mean, that's the first thing.
Okay.
And I don't know how far it'll get in Missouri, but there's a lot of people in Missouri that are questioning genetically modified crops. There's a lot of farmers who don't plant them. They have a hard time getting seeds sometimes, but there's a lot of farmers who don't plant them. And I've got a copy, if anybody's interested, of the seed agreement. I didn't bring it today, but if you have a copy of the agreement that farmers have to sign, it's pretty in-depth. I mean, people have to sign over, we have the right to go to your internet service provider and get the records of where you've been, and we can come in your house and all your properties and all your vehicles and look through your stuff. And I mean, it's pretty exhaustive in terms of what they're willing to do to sign up farmers with their seed.
What states have labeling bills that are out there?
I'm not on top of the list right now. California's failed, and that was a big blow. It was a big blow. There was a huge advertising campaign around that to say the opponents of labeling were saying, oh, it's going to be confusing, and it's going to cost, and it's going to be whatever. And so the last minute, they put in millions of dollars in it.
So I came in late too, but aren't the Europeans much more concerned with GM products? And
Yeah,
all
they're
that?
very much more concerned.
And it's been a history, and there's labeling, and people
There's
know.
labeling, I mean, the products are still there, and they're still, that's where the article came from about the GM potatoes and the spraying right before harvest. And so they're still there, but they're labeled and folks are more aware of genetically modified things. They also have a different farming system over a lot of Europe. They haven't quite done what we've done.
The agribusiness?
Yeah, they have a much more localized farming system there and food system, food traditions, right? And they're very defensive about their food traditions, at least in France and Poland, some places.
How states in Western list that you showed us of like fruits or vegetables that have genetic modified? I think probably most of the produce at this point is not genetically modified. Is
Yeah,
that
the
what it is?
zucchini and crickneck squash and
Beets.
well, beets, but mostly sugar beets, so probably not the beets you find in the store. But they're watching other ones. They're watching some squashes. They're watching the cucumbers. They're watching because they're watching tomatoes. But that didn't work. So, but right now it's mostly just squash, zucchini, and then corn.
So if you're buying seed, I'm part of the community garden, and if we're buying seed for the garden, how do we know it's not modified?
You have to know your seed provider. There's only a few providers will guarantee. Baker Creek will guarantee. They test their seed for GM. And
Baker
seed,
Creek?
Yeah, Baker Creek. They're in Missouri.
Kill, I think.
Yeah.
Magazine.
And the Seed Saver Exchange is the other one that people rely on from Iowa.
I ordered from Seed Savers last night, and it says right in the description non-GMO, as well as organic.
And then there's another company called Terroir, T-E-R-R-O-I-R Seeds, and they are non-GMO too. T-E-R-R-O-I-R, it's French.
O-I-R.
If they're labeled organic, are they non-GMO?
Right.
So zucchini in the store that's labeled organic would not be a
Right.
GMO zucchini,
Right.
anything.
But the most heirloom seeds also.
Yeah, heirloom seeds are heirloom seeds, and they're safe bets usually.
Heirlooms.
Yeah, they're engineered at a different rate, not in a laboratory. So, generations. This project has been educational for me because I had to do a lot of research. I mean, I'm exposed to the GM issue, but I work on farm policy on the other side, and so, I work with farmers and people doing thousands of acres, and so I have to be informed about it, but I wasn't in depth aware of how GMOs got regulated or not. I wasn't aware of what health studies have been done or not. And so I'm going to keep looking too and see what else is out there. There's more to find, I'm sure. And if you find some, just email them to me, email me the links or something. We'll build the library until we can start having conversations with policy folks on it.
I think I remember seeing that there are numbers on produce, and aren't GMOs a certain number?
I haven't seen a number for GMOs yet. I know that 9 is organic.
Well, 9 is organic, so it's just the opposite, it has to be.
And 4 is standard.
And
Is that right? I remember that. I think 9
Where
is
do you
organic.
see those numbers? I've never
On the little UPC code,
Okay.
little stickers that they put on all those silly peppers that don't come off. Like, what is that glue made of, right? Anyway, so if it's got a 9, it's organic.
You mean 9 is the first digit?
Yeah,
Oh, of the 4 or 5 digit number.
It's a 4-digit number.
barcode.
So you know when the checker's checking out your produce, they have to put in that code that says that's the code for garlic or the code for green peppers. If it starts with a 9, it's
Is it the
okay.
PLU code?
Huh?
Is it the PLU code?
Yeah, that's right. PLU code, not to be confused with the UPC code.
That's right.
Jeez.
Yes, the acronyms are crazy. I've had to learn USDA acronyms. So it took me 2 years to learn Clean Water Act acronyms, and now I have to learn USDA acronyms. And now we can write whole, haikus and poetry just in
Just an acronym.
Yeah. Okay, by the way, you have to read this book. It's mandatory. If you're a human being that eats food, you should read this book. And it's got an easy to remember title. The Erosion of Civilizations. It's a fascinating read. It's a bit of history and a bit of farming and good information about where we need to put our priorities. I mean, our long-term problem in this country is we have this national debt, right? It's huge. We have this ecological debt that's as huge. And if we don't start paying both of those down, we're in trouble. So we need to attend to that business. Thank you for having me, and you can call me.
If you don't have an Amigo business card, please take one. If you don't have reusable grocery bags, please take some. Take and exchange magazines and books. And thank you all for coming. See you next month.
Thank you, Dirk.
Promise not down to the snowstorm.